Welcome to Critical Junction, episode 45, part 2. I'm Mark.
I'm Luke.
I'm Jill.
So this is our retrospective on our previous episode dealing with abortion that we had, where we spoke to our guest Matt Zemrau. So we thought the issue was important enough to go and clarify a couple of things that we didn't address on the spot. That'll be today. I want to start, first of all, by acknowledging the irony of a bunch of penises talking about what is arguably primarily a women's issue. But at the same time, I think abortion is important enough as a societal issue that if those of us who are in favor of a woman's right to choose recuse ourselves from the conversation, it just eliminates an entire segment of the population that would stand up for the cause. So I just, wanted to point that out. So there was one point in the conversation where I made the assertion that philosophers and bioethicists and so forth haven't been able to determine what constitutes a person. Mm-hmm. But what I was trying to say, and I don't think I articulated this properly enough, was that they were unable to determine when something becomes a person, rather than saying, what constitutes a person. So that kind of took the conversation off into a different direction. I was really trying to get at the point of not being able to determine when something becomes a person. So just asserting that a fetus is a person would be the arrogant position to hold. So that's something I wanted to clarify on my end. Jill, I know you had a bunch of points you wanted to bring up.
So I guess the first one that I thought needed a little bit of a button put on it is the discussion of death. At one point, Matt mentioned that the determination of death is the cessation of heartbeat, full stop. But that's not actually accurate.
Right.
There's a lot of stuff that goes into determining when somebody's dead. Clinical death, which is an older, more traditional kind of standard of determining death, according to the cessation of heartbeat and of breathing. That's not the be all end all of when we declare someone officially dead for good. Mm-hmm. Contemporary determinant of death actually requires other factors beyond that. When you get clinical death, when somebody's heart stops and their breathing stops, that actually engenders a next step or other steps beyond that, such as efforts to revive the person. So if you find someone with their heart stopped, you don't just go, that guy's dead.
Right, in cold water, your heart can be stopped for quite a long time, can it not? For up to what? Like people have survived up to
minutes.
No, has it not gone up to half an hour or something like that? Like super high numbers kind of thing in terms of surviving. Don't quote me on this.
Okay.
But I know it's more than just a couple of minutes. It's a long time.
Yeah, okay.
A long time, everyone.
The scientific term is a long time.
So anyway, when the heart stops, the doctors have to do CPR, and maybe defibrillation. Like you get those paddles out and you go clear.
Oh, I love those paddles.
Those are great, right? Especially on TV. And there are other signs that are looked for also, like autonomic responses, like when they look into your eye with the little flashlight there, and they check for if your pupils dilate, things like this. So death will then only be declared if CPR that's initiated after clinical death fails, or continued efforts to revive the person are deemed ineffective. That's when you have to go through those steps first to then say, okay, we'll call it.
So it's not just
when the heart stops.
And for my part, I made the assertion that it's brain activity, the cessation of brain activity, that determines death, which that's true to the extent that brain dead is dead, right? Once you reach brain death, you're dead. That's it. So
I mean, it's kind of a medieval idea, actually, that like the center of life is the heart. I think actually culturally, the sense among most people is that like they're homunculus or whatever. They're like the being of themselves that is inside their body,
like the seat,
you know,
yeah.
What some people will call the soul and stuff like that. People kind of more see it as in the head now.
Yeah, you're right. Like in the sense, a head transplant would transplant that person.
That person. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It would probably include the spine. I'm not sure.
Well,
and I mean, you can declare death when brain activity stops. Like if somebody's like plugged into a machine and living off machines, when the brain activity stops, even if their heart is still beating or their lungs are still breathing autonomically, if the brain activity stops, that'll be a declaration of death.
Right.
That'll engender a declaration of death.
So vice versa, if we were to remove the head, put another person's head on it, that is not the same person.
Kind of missing the point, but
yeah, the head is the person.
Yes.
Not the body.
Yeah.
And also they declare death legally, which I guess is another kind of
there's clinical death and legal death.
You got clinical death, legal death, and death.
death.
And legal death, that's something that you can declare, like, just if a person goes missing for a long time.
Right.
So, you know.
Yeah, right. And this happens
on some level, society accepts that this person is dead, even if we haven't confirmed that their heart, quote, has stopped. You know.
By the way, if anyone listening is unfamiliar with what we're talking about, please go back and listen to the first part of this episode for some context, then come back and listen to this, because that kind of matters.
Yeah.
But no, you're right. The heart stopping it used to be the determinant, but I think it was after the 1970s or somewhere in that area where they started factoring in all these other items that need to be considered before you can legally or clinically declare someone to be dead. And yeah, it comes down to the finality of death is the cessation of brain activity, right? Brain dead is dead. And that's why they test for the pupil thing, like you were saying, and all that other stuff. So yeah, I think that was important to clarify. There are a few other things that came up during the episode, so let's go through the notes that we took and go from there. So that was one of them. There was also
consent to sex equals consent to pregnancy.
Right.
Was basically one of his points, because we all know that pregnancy happens as a result of sex. That automatically somehow means that if you engage in sex and consent to sex, then automatically you are bound to accepting
the consequence or
the pregnancy consequence. But I mean, the mere possibility, it's not a certainty. Like, it's not as if pregnancy occurs every time somebody has sex. So the mere possibility of impregnation resulting from sex can't be sufficient to say that consent to sex entails consent to the possible, let's call them, side effect of the possible side effect that is conception of.
Right. And I think that was coming from a place of, the act of sex is the act of procreation, and therefore the result needs to be maintained, kind of thing. I'm not entirely sure if that's the argument that he was going for, but that's the sense I get from it.
Yeah, and whether or not he's aware of it, he admitted that his foundation for his moral position is
right. It's almost like a pylon argument. He already has his other argument.
His faith in the Bible, and so I think you can't get away from the fact that that'll be informing.
Yeah.
That kind of idea, and the idea of sex being only for procreation is famously kind of a controversial assertion of Christian doctrine, right?
Yeah. And I really want to get into
which leads to all kinds of other aberrant kind of shit, which is like about like shaming sex and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that Matt would go along with that stuff, because he made some comments that were that didn't actually go along with that more traditional kind of.
Right. No, I really want to get in.
doctrine.
I want to really get into the issue of the Bible as a foundation for morality. That's a good segue, I guess. I really cannot see a decent argument for using the Bible as a foundation for morality if you can take into consideration all the immoral acts that are advocated for in the Bible. Things like owning people as property or genocide. The fact that God killed a bunch of people in a giant flood, supposedly, these are all telltale signs of an immoral God. And like the Bible itself is rife.
Or relegating half of the human species to second-class status.
Speaking of second-class status, the Bible is rife with examples of women being lesser than men. Just
that's
just to pull up a couple of like concrete examples from parts of the Bible.
I will not suffer a woman to teach a man.
Yeah, there's that. There's also from Ephesians 5:22 to 24, the last part of it. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. There's the whole thing in Exodus 21 about, and if a man sell his daughter to be a maidservant, she shall not go out as the maidservants do. If she please not her master, who hath betrothed her to himself, then shall he let her be redeemed. To sell her unto a strange nation he shall have no power, seeing he hath dealt deceitfully with her. So, advocating owning people as property that they can trade with other people. Behold, now I have 2 daughters with which have not known man. Let me, I pray you, bring them unto you, and do ye to them as is good in your eyes. Like, all of these things are telling of the fact that women are, in the Bible, not equal to men. They're inferior to men in every capacity. That's why you don't see female priests in the Catholic Church, is because of that whole thing you were mentioning earlier, where like they're to remain silent and all this stuff. So arguing that the Bible is a good moral foundation, especially when it comes to the issue of abortion, which is, again, primarily a women's issue, is just incoherent.
I brought up the idea with Gilles of the fall from paradise being the initial reading of the difference between good and evil, like eating from the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. So I was suggesting that you then brought up the point of when it's not a choice and when it is a choice. I don't know how I'd explain that now in conversation. Go on, Jill. Explain my thoughts.
So when a moral concept is kind of obvious, like when something is obviously morally wrong versus morally right, you were suggesting that there's almost not a choice there. It's that's not one of the cases that illustrates our free will and our free moral agency, that we were kind of, I guess according to Genesis, we were punished with that after we ate from the tree of knowledge. So the actual moral choice only exists on those marginal kind of edge cases, or
the teetering cases.
Yeah, the teetering.
This is where we're making choices, and this is where, in a sense, the choosing of right and wrong is deemed evil by God in that first punishment.
Yeah, there is something I want to bring up, which is directly related to that, and it's if you accept morality as being dictated by an external supreme agent, for example, God or whatever, then if that agent decides on a whim to redefine what's considered moral and immoral, you would have no choice but to go along with that, because it's dictated to you and it's therefore law. For example, if God were to suddenly decide, you know what, it's now immoral for people to, wear long sleeve shirts. That would now be, wearing a long sleeve shirt would be an immoral act, which you would necessarily need to recognize.
Or to mix different kind of fabrics.
Yeah, to take a concrete example from the actual Bible, that is something you would necessarily, by virtue of believing that your morals are dictated by God, have to accept beyond doubt as being an immoral act. Right?
Yeah.
There is no
even though on any standard of regular reason, there's absolutely nothing to suggest that something like that has any moral value one way or the other.
Like the majority of the Ten Commandments are not moral statements. Like I tried to make this argument during the original discussion, right? Thou shalt have no other god before me. Why is that a moral indication? Or an indicator?
It's not. It's kind of mental totalitarianism.
Exactly.
It's like it's something just arbitrarily dictating what you are and are not allowed to think
Suggesting
about.
an insecurity in the previous.
Right.
Because you won't believe this shit as it goes along.
Or
So you better.
the graven images thing. How is that a moral indicator?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, so people like to pick and choose the couple of items in the Ten Commandments that could be considered moral actions, like the injunction against killing. Well, even that there's some wiggle room, right? Because morality, as I understand it and as I accept it, is directly situational. So you can make the argument that it is moral to kill somebody in certain situations within certain contexts, you know, and just arbitrarily or universally declaring that killing is immoral isn't necessarily true. Like if you believe in the Bible and you accept it as your moral foundation, then it has to be universally true because it's being told to you as law that these are your sets of morals. Another example would be the shellfish thing. So God had time to tell people not to eat shellfish, but never said anything about not owning people.
Yeah.
Like how is that a solid foundation for morality?
Yeah. Either way, the distinction between what is good and evil, even if it is presenting the Ten Commandments, is still a violation of that initial rule that made them fall from paradise. Is what I wanted to suggest there. That the choosing, the thinking.
Well, the fall from paradise, basically, I think they would say the fall from paradise happened. You know, the fruit was eaten.
Yeah, but because that's
you can't uneat that fruit.
It's the entire foundation of the Christ Redeemer figure, so we have to accept that.
Yeah, so now they have no choice but to
now choose between and try and follow and
choose between good and evil.
I guess I don't read it that way. I see it as now the rest of this parable is the continuing of the eating of that fruit. Like it all stems from that. The fruit is continued to be eaten. I mean, I don't know. That's the way I interpret the Bible. Just like I interpret the message of
yeah, that's interesting because I guess then you've got that would kind of explain what the purpose of the Bible is, I guess, because if it's just that we if it's that we already ate the fruit and now we have no choice but to then what was the point of that Genesis story if it isn't to
the point is
if it isn't to supposedly guide you on some
the healing figure is the Jesus character that suggests it's not about making a choice, it's about building the foundation of love and compassion. And from there, the choice is spontaneous and not actually a choice. Leading back to that other idea of it's not a choice. And in a sense, a choice should never be made. It should be automatic. Like in a sense, when I asked the person that I live with that is a female, hey, would you like to be part of the podcast? She went, oh, what's the subject matter? And to which her response was, I can't believe that's still an issue. Fuck no, I don't want to do that. You know, like it's even a problem that I don't want to talk about that shit. You know what I mean? I can't believe it even needs to be talked about.
That's a really good point. Like the fact that we still need to have this conversation is really telling in a way, right? Especially, you know, it's the 21st century. You'd think we would have been able to move beyond these Iron Age philosophies that have all these injunctions and prohibitions against things that just make no sense. Right, the blending of fabrics or the eating of shellfish and all this other stuff,
and when I asked Matt about I think I asked him directly why he believes that the Bible is not written by man.
Oh, this is the conversation we had after the show. Yeah.
Was that after the
Yeah,
show?
yeah.
Okay, so I because he said that ultimately his moral position is based on his faith,
Right.
and that he has to like in the sort of genealogy of his morals, to borrow a phrase. He can't go any further than that.
Right.
He has to point to his faith.
Yeah, faith, full stop. You know.
Full stop. But then I wonder how then can you tell the difference between a valid point of faith versus what everybody else who wouldn't appeal to that faith would just understand as a prejudicial intuition.
See, that's what I was trying to get across with my question of, well, is there any position you couldn't take on faith? Right? Because then you have all these other conflicting faith-based ideas. How do you determine which ones are objectively right if you can just believe anything on faith? Right?
Yeah.
Which necessarily means that faith is not a reliable pathway to truth.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was suggesting that maybe that question wasn't answered satisfactorily because maybe it could have used like a rewording.
Yeah, I don't
what,
think
like what can you not take on faith? Kind of. I can see it being understood to be asking a completely different question.
Yeah, I don't think I posed it properly.
And I had suggested what was it that I suggested? Oh yeah, so something like
Go on.
something like, is there a specific moral position on a specific moral issue that you think could not be justified by faith alone? Like, for example, I believe beheading people who follow something other than the Quran is moral, and I justify it by faith alone.
Right.
So you can't argue that that's wrong because
I
you
have
have to grant that faith is a perfectly valid reason.
It's true, and in this sense, it becomes a question of something intelligent can be said, but is it wise?
Right.
To put forward an idea like you cannot have an abortion, and I impose this upon you. It may support some other value, but you're creating a scenario, an ideology that can lead to horror and terrible things in the real world.
Yeah, the imposition of a particular set of morals, religious morals especially, leads to those types of problems, right? Like with the example you just brought up, Gilles, like if this is that person's faith that they can behead somebody who disagrees with them, you would have to recognize that if you accept faith as a solid validation for a position.
Yeah,
right?
and I just don't believe that somebody like Matt would just say, well, okay, I guess we just have different subjective opinions that are completely both just as valid, and we have to leave it at that. No, he or someone of his faith would have to recognize the conflict there.
There's a
that on some level they understand that it's morally abhorrent to arbitrarily kind of determine that somebody who doesn't follow your book rather than his book needs to be beheaded, or can justifiably be murdered.
Yeah, and the reason why we can, in my opinion, objectively determine that beheading somebody is morally reprehensible, like I said during the episode, it comes down to well-being being a better foundation for morality. Because and I explained this on the spot, like if we accept well-being as a foundation for morality, you can make objective determinations about which actions lead to that goal. And cutting someone's head off is objectively not in the interests of their well-being, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, it certainly violates their goal.
So that's why I strongly espouse this idea of secular morality, because I think it's a better system to work within, because it's not imposed on anyone. And morality is, again, situational in this context. What leads to well-being, while you can make objective determinations, will again depend on the situation. So if you accept the foundation as well-being, regardless of the situation you find yourself in, you can determine which actions will ultimately lead to well-being in that situation, right? To me, it works.
Yeah.
And it eliminates all these problems that are imposed by religious morality.
It's funny how you end with, to me it works.
To me, meaning I understand it to work better than religious morality.
That's still better. Because the other one, he could say the same thing. Well, to me it works.
There's a difference between saying to me and for me it works.
Yeah.
Right? Like, to me, meaning in my view, according to how I understand it and how I've observed it to function, secular morality is a better system.
I suppose he's presenting a logic for a non-existent world. A world of, and if everyone thought like this, then this would be the case. It's not a lot. Like it's trying to ignore the validity of everything around it with a bubble. I don't really. I don't know.
I think that's just a flaw of any dogma.
It's very insular.
It's a blocker.
Yeah,
it's a blocker.
Yeah.
Well, it tries to shoehorn reality into
outdated philosophy,
into a simplified or simplistic kind of set of I guess rules or whatever.
And human existence is anything but simple.
In this case, it seems to be a case of deciding. Like I remember in the show, I was defining it as a line being drawn, and I called it like calling the acorn the tree in the car, and I really liked that. But that is what it is. It draws a line there, calls that a tree, and goes. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, the whole argument,
like there is no argument.
Came down to just making the assertion that an acorn is a tree.
Yeah.
A zygote is a person.
Right. Yeah.
Which actually, okay. Sorry.
Well, no. I don't know what I was going to say there. It was going to be great. I could feel that.
I just stepped on it.
I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
I want to bring up the repeated appeals to emotion and disgust.
Actually, before we get to that, what we were just talking about, though, with the acorn is a tree, that ties into another thing that I had a problem with, and that was when we were talking about like a piece of a person versus a full-fledged person.
Right.
Meanwhile, earlier we had the whole conversation about it. Well, it's the head.
Yeah, so we toyed with a few examples in there. So we had like the example of a severed dead hand, right? Is that a person? No, that's only a piece of a person.
The embryo thing.
It's got all the DNA and everything that the embryo has after the fertilization of the egg, which apparently was the definition of the start of life. Once you get that combined DNA, boom, you've got a person. So the severed dead hand, that's not a person. That's just a piece of a person. Mm-hmm. There was the other example you brought up, Mark, of the living, beating, lab-grown heart, right? Mm-hmm. So that's in some sense it's alive, it's beating, and it works, and it's got the full DNA. But nope, that's not a person. That's a piece of a person. Then you've got the undeveloped zygote that's no less holding the combined individual human DNA of the parents, or has like its own individual DNA now. But it's lacking a hand, and it's lacking a full heart at least at some stage, and it's also lacking the developed neurology that's necessary for sentience. And it's lacking all kinds of other features too, but that's not a piece anymore.
Now it's a person.
Now it's a full-fledged person.
Well,
even though that's no less just a collection of fragments of the features of a person.
Yeah. And that's why I brought up the issue of removing the 1/8 of the embryo to determine viability. Are you taking away 1/8 of a person? Is the embryo a person because it meets all these characteristics of having DNA and all this other stuff?
He was able to say potential person was good enough. So he was claiming it right from the beginning of the connection of the sperm to the egg, or not the connection, but the sperm getting into the egg. like that's where the line is drawn. That is now a human life, and it is murder after that.
Right. Regardless of if it's a potential person or, if it...
Well, regardless,
Yeah,
there didn't
right.
seem to be any stipulation that we could really see. I don't think. We could be wrong, but I don't know.
So then those aren't consistent premises then, because one of them was that the premise is what is a life, and what is definitively a life, and you can't say that's not a person or a life. Whereas the other one, which you just brought up, allows for two different stages, just a potential person and then there's a person. I don't think he was actually allowing for the potential.
Yeah. See, this
stage.
like I said during the episode, this whole all these notions of personhood and murder and it's a human, please don't kill it, totally miss the point of abortion by definition being the termination of a pregnancy, which has the side effect of the cessation of life of the fetus. And there's a line here that Matt Dillahunty gave me in an email exchange that I didn't have a chance to use. Shout out to Matt Dillahunty. Thanks for giving me this little tidbit. But
that's pretty cool and amazing that you actually interacted with Matt Dillahunty.
But what he said was that, how did it go? Abortion is no more murder than not allowing someone to stay in your guest room is forced homelessness, which I thought was an awesome line. So, yeah, anyway.
Right, and if that person staying in your guest room had no home, they would be homeless.
Yeah, and it's not, you're not forcing them to be homeless. You're just not allowing them to stay in your guest house or guest room or whatever, right? Just as the termination of a pregnancy is not equal to the killing of a fetus. It's not the active act of doing that, right? Speaking of active acts, this whole dismemberment thing, which I was alluding to, deals to
the emotional weight
thing,
right, yes.
So I had to do some digging into this. The whole dismemberment thing is a classic argument and an appeal to emotion that anti-choice people tend to make. This happens, it actually doesn't happen. The dismemberment thing, we'll get to that in a second, but it's the result of
So you're talking about when they invoke the grotesque to kind of pluck at the pure emotional revulsion reaction.
Yeah, I just want to explain the procedure
as if that was equal to a moral determinant. But if something is sort of automatically repulsive, then automatically it's also immoral.
Yeah, which we'll get to in a second. I just want to explain the procedure before we delve into that part. So it's called dilation and expulsion. Right? It's a second trimester procedure where they dilate the cervix and they remove the fetus by vacuum suction and forceps, which sometimes leads to the tearing of fetal tissue. It's not dismemberment. It's just sometimes they, while pulling the thing out, will tear part of the tissue. So they invoke the grotesque analogy of, well, they're dismembering the fetus and they're chopping it up into little bits. And he made the false analogy of comparing that to if you're euthanizing your dog, you're not going to go ahead and chop its legs off and all this other stuff. Yeah. That, again, false analogy there, because euthanasia is the act, the active act of killing something humanely to end its suffering. Whereas abortion is the termination of a pregnancy and not the killing of the fetus. So it's not they're not comparable.
Well, I mean, the fetus dies anyways. It's kind of just semantics, no?
Semantics matter because it's not, you're not killing something so much as you are letting something die.
Yeah.
Or not allowing.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about mens rea, right? That came up during our conversation as something that's required for the concept of murder, right? You have to have that guilty mind, that intent to kill something. Yeah. And that just is not. That's not part of the equation when you get to. When it comes to abortion.
When a woman is consulting with a doctor about whether or not she should go ahead with an abortion, and the doctor agrees to it, the doctor's not going, all right, we're going to kill some babies today.
Yes. What I guess I'm getting at is that someone that believes the line is drawn right after the sperm meets the egg, this argument doesn't mean anything to them, because to them it is killing. Right?
I know.
Like they've diagnosed it with life. They've endowed it with life, the fetus.
Right.
At a certain point, like it's like pushing people around with their lawnmowers because they're chopping down like an acorn that has begun to grow, and calling it a tree, and telling people, like, calling the city, like, people are chopping down trees, man.
Yeah. So this brings us back to the idea of invoking the grotesque as an argument, right? Which it isn't. That's just, it's not a premise. It's not a conclusion. It's not an argument. It just doesn't. It doesn't have any effect on whether or not something is true, right? Mm-hmm. You can't just say, well, it's disgusting, therefore it should be illegal. That's not how we determine legislation.
Yeah. Oftentimes pooping is disgusting. You can't make pooping illegal.
Right.
Right? And it's also not immoral.
Everybody poops. Okay, so there's that.
It's an R.E.M. song, isn't it? Oh, everyone hurts.
Everybody poops. I should stop singing on the show because it's embarrassing.
Oh, you've only just begun.
Okay, what else did we want to
another point was about the risk of pregnancy, the risks involved with pregnancy.
Okay.
So I had brought up that that it wasn't necessarily just a contest between the right to life of the fetus versus not the right to life of the mother, but rather some other kind of right, like right to bodily autonomy, but that you could conceive of that mother's right also as, on some level, a right to life issue. So it's basically a contest of two rights to life. And the reason why I say that is because there are risks to pregnancy. 1.5% of women in the U.S., like, we're not talking about some poor country here where conditions for birth are terrible. We're talking about the first world. 1.5% of women in the U.S., 1 in 100 women who have a baby in the U.S. will die in childbirth. Mm-hmm. That's hardly, quote, astronomically low, unquote, what's
the number? 1 in what?
As Matt had tried to wave it away. 1.5%, so that's 1 in 100. That more than 1 in 100, you know?
Yeah, that's not insignificant.
That's not insignificant. That's a real number, you know? So there's that risk, and then there's also the risk of other kind of injuries or harms that can come from childbirth, which aren't death, but which are also real. So it's a meaningful risk that no one is obligated to accept, nor should they be compelled to accept it by somebody else who's using their own subjective risk assessment, right? Like, there's no reason why my assessment of the risk should be overridden by your assessment of the risk for some risk that isn't even relevant to you specifically. So that was another point that I thought needed to be emphasized there.
I have nothing to add to that one. That pretty much sums up what I was going to say about it too.
Yeah.
Well, I find that this episode, part 2, stems from almost a sense of guilt, like that we didn't say enough, you know? I don't know. Like, in a sense that in that original episode, if Mark, for example, things had gone well and you had been able to speak, and he would go, you know, maybe you got a point there. Like, we're basically looking for a thing that we can, in a sense, give him that allows him to bear shift his emotional weight idea to something else, you know what I mean? And in a sense, there's a sense of failure that we feel afterwards, that this is maybe where this, you know.
Well, so I don't know if it's so much guilt as responsibility.
Yeah.
And,
well, yes, right. This is what I mean.
When we do a debate, when we do a debate with someone live, who's on the opposite side of the issue, there's a whole nother dynamic that's going on there. There's like a whole social dynamic that's also playing out there.
Yeah.
And it's more on some level it's more of a game of rhetoric than it is more the kind of skeptical exploration
it's
that
playing,
we normally
it's playing a word game.
hope we're doing, you know. So there's that kind of word playing and stuff like that.
Yeah, like
so
sorry, go ahead.
Just to finish, like when I talk about the responsibility that we feel, it's just that I feel like there's a responsibility not to leave the impression that even though we were nice during that last show, that it's a wash, you know, and that I guess it's okay to suggest that abortion doctors are murderers and that moms are who are terminating or pregnant women who are terminating their pregnancies are in some sense murderers too. I don't want to at all leave that suggestion out there because that's wrong.
Yeah, like in the spirit,
and I feel there's a responsibility to make sure that at least I leave that clear.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. Like in the spirit of having a civilized conversation in part one, there wasn't as much of an emphasis, like you said, on our traditional skeptical approach to the subject matter. Right? It was we were having the discussion, we were having the conversation, but now, you know, I do want to make it clear that the position that I hold, anyway, needs to be elaborated to the point where there is no room for confusion about, well, maybe both sides have a point. You know, maybe we should hear out people who hold this view that abortion doctors are murderers. You know, like, yeah, I'm in agreement there. Like, there is that sense of responsibility that I think this episode tries to address.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so another point that I wanted to just bring up was the suggestion that Matt made that there was sort of a hierarchy of sin and that killing was sort of the worst sin you can do. So automatically the arguments that are in defense of life and against killing or whatever, those are the ones that matter, and all the other sins against the, like, stealing the autonomy of the woman, those don't matter as much because there's one biggest sin.
Right.
You know,
it carried more weight.
So that one carries more weight. And
it's a higher card. It's a face
that
card.
That one's the one that
That's
matters.
the face card.
That's the face card, sure, yeah. So I mean, there are varying interpretations on this, but you can find in the Bible where it actually states that there is no such hierarchy. James 2:10 says, "Whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles at just one point is guilty of breaking all of it." So
that's pretty clear.
That's pretty black and white, if you ask me.
Back to the Bible. Yeah, I don't really have anything else to add on that one. Like it's pretty cut and dry if you take that into consideration, right? Like there's no hierarchy of sin.
Yeah.
It seems to me that what that one passage is saying, that all sins are equally sinful. You know. Mm-hmm. Am I misinterpreting that? Or
the deadly sins all lead to death and hellfire, right? Like, yeah. So
in a sense, the ill will is the sin. That whatever you're presenting is, regardless of how big it is, it's bad is equally bad with everything else. Bad is bad.
Bad is bad.
Bad is bad.
Yeah.
Nice tautology. Bad is bad.
Bad is bad. Yeah, okay, so I think that was...
I can't remember if there was anything that I wanted to bring up that might be in your notes there, Jill.
The one thing that struck me a lot was the idea of the emotional weight
of
something.
Mm-hmm.
And even so then, the measuring of such emotional weight and how would one do so.
Mm-hmm.
And what we discussed afterwards was, after we stopped hitting record and we did talk about the God issue with Matt, he talked about the relationship with God kind of thing.
Okay.
And so I would assume that I don't know what a relationship with God means other than... so when I'm trying to think about these issues, I was talking to Gilles about this earlier, that I kind of go...
With God
I try to be a little bit method and try to imagine what it's like, right? So I can't imagine
a method interlocutor.
I can't imagine having faith in God. But I do have a relationship, let's say, with what I could interpret to be God, which is certain experiences in my life that I do not interpret to be God, but that I would say hold the weight of, for example, parables in the Bible where people are talking to like burning bushes and shit like that. So what I'm claiming is that in that sense, I'm speaking directly to God, not having faith in it or anything like that. And that if I'm to get any message at all from anything that I've experienced in my life, all I've ever felt was any sort of presence of compassion and love. So I would suggest that this is the emotional measuring here that takes place. So it would be the relationship with this compassion and love that's the tool of measurement. So to just have faith in compassion and love isn't having compassion and love. It's having faith in it, but not playing a part in it.
Yeah, it's like the belief in the belief
really
idea, in a way, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think I understand where you're going. I don't agree with you labeling compassion and love God, but that's another story.
No, what I'm saying is that in my experiences of what I could interpret to be a relationship with a God, like what I'm saying is I'm trying to be method here, and I'm going. In my experiences as a human being, what can I interpret to be my relationship with God? I would say that is the closest I can come to what I could.
So if you were
if I were to say I believe in God, that would be God. Like these experiences that I've had, and what I'm claiming is that the only things I've ever learned from these experiences or come away from is not rules about how things work.
Right.
It's just love and compassion, and you know what I mean. So what I'm suggesting is that this, I would assume, is the measuring point for which we're determining whether things are, this weight of emotion is measured from a position of this relationship with what I would say is...
Okay, so yeah.
What I'm
so
saying
you're kind of establishing a justification for the invocation of emotional weight in the moral calculus.
I'm making it a variable, and I'm suggesting that not the focus. I wonder if I wrote it down. The word.
I like the moral calculus thing.
Yeah, the capacity to measure. Let's see. Blah, blah, blah. Compassion. Point of reference. Like you would need a point of reference to measure something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so I'm suggesting it's this love and compassion idea, which is a focal point of the Bible and religions and shit like that. Am I wrong? Like, if we're to strip it away, is this not the central message?
No. Like the central message.
Just my readings of Bibles.
I think that's a subjective. That's like a possible interpretation that I suppose is reasonable.
You can make the interpretation, but you have to remember.
I don't by any means think that that's the the orthodox way of.
So I'm endowing that Bible with good shit that it doesn't have.
You need to remember.
It might have it.
You need to remember that the God of the Bible, Yahweh, or whatever you want to call it, is an Iron Age God of war, right? Like this God is pernicious. He's capricious. He's genocidal.
Yes.
He's a murderous entity. So the idea of compassion and love is injected at some point later on in the New Testament. In some parts. But like believers.
Well, hold on. This is the overriding message.
They make it.
No. Do not think that I have come to abolish the.
Yeah, do not think that I've come to bring peace upon earth. I've come to bring war and death, or something to that effect. I can't remember the exact quotation.
Yeah, or something about a sword.
Yeah, I've come to bring the sword. Is what it was. Like Jesus has a lot of really negative shit to say, and people who believe in the Christian faith will cherry pick bits and pieces of the Bible that fit in with their idea that it's based on love and compassion.
Well, what is the sword? Do we know what the sword represents? What was he talking about?
Jesus has come to fulfill the shit in the Old Testament by destroying all the non-believers, similar to what happens in the Quran, right? There's a lot of destruction that Jesus advocates for.
I always thought the only point of violence in the Bible was from Jesus, anyways, was the when he got upset and flipped the tables. And
Oh, there's also when he killed the fig tree.
Yeah.
Out of like some kind of weird petty spite there.
oh yeah, he killed a fig tree.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not
It was
all...
like a Kids in the Hall skit or like Jesus or something.
Like, the New Testament isn't all butterflies and rainbows.
No,
No,
there's some
fucking-
cherry picking to go on to kind of smooth out the
No,
edges and make it look all bubblegum.
As is any story,
and-
there's always bits.
What's some other happy-go-lucky things? Bubblegum and jujubes.
And gummy bears.
Sorry, what?
I don't know.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
I got hung up on the bubblegum and jujubes.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm very easily distracted.
so Maya, what were we even talking about?
The Bible.
Oh yeah, whether or not the Bible is all about bringing or highlighting love and compassion as
Well, I always thought that was the overriding message.
the
of
one
Christ
pillar
kind
of
thing.
spirituality.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, like I said, I think that's a possible interpretation, but I think you have to do a lot of cherry picking to get there.
I see. Yeah, no, I guess I like that interpretation. He's up there
Yeah.
on the cross going, well, the meek shall inherit the world, but I got this one, guys. So I've
Yeah.
died for you in that sense that I get to die having gotten
Mm-hmm.
it, and you don't. Love and compassion, everyone. Peace out.
So let's address
What
the issue of illegal abortions and the associated deaths.
Right. So if the pro-life side is arguing that its ultimate value there is life, while
human life, not life, human birth.
Yeah,
and not even life, just the birth.
Yeah, actually, if you want to get
Because we're out of here after that.
If you want to get technical about it,
It's done.
the
It's
pro-life
done. All right, we're outta
position
here.
is all about pro-birth rather than pro-life.
Yeah.
But
In fact, once you're born,
if
we
they
got something
are,
to tell you can't have an abortion.
let's say they really were most concerned with protecting life, then if you look at the actual like raw numbers that you can get from like the WHO, so underground abortions, the unsafe abortions that happen because there's no legal safe
Yeah.
option. 47,000 deaths per year occur as a result of unsafe abortions. 5 million hospitalizations result.
Per year.
Yeah. Hospitalizations from harm resulting from unsafe abortions. So even if, for the sake of argument, you grant that right to life is the greatest right, fuck all the other rights.
Yeah.
Criminalizing abortion leads to more killed.
Yeah.
So if you want to be pro-life, you want to be pro-abortion, basically.
Yeah, and I mentioned...
Or pro-legal abortion.
I mentioned two things in the introduction that directly relate to that. The introduction of of part one of the episode. One was that research paper by Marge Bearer, and the other was the study by the Guttmacher Institute, and both of which reached the conclusion that the number of deaths associated to abortion go down in correspondence to safe and legal abortions.
Since Roe v. Wade in the States, deaths from abortions had consistently been shrinking over decades. And as these efforts ramped up state by state to make abortion illegal and impossible to get, then we've seen a reversal of that trend.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're seeing clear statistical...
It's indisputable.
Yeah, okay.
Like how many years have
That's
they
why
been
the
tracking these
WHO
numbers?
recommends
Yeah,
legal abortion if you actually care about saving lives.
And
So
the
pro-life is
WHO
not pro-life, it's pro-birth.
The WHO has a list of criteria that constitute safe abortions, and like the more of these items on that list that abortion doctors follow, the safer the procedure is, and the less deaths occur. So that was one of the recommendations in the Guttmacher study: is if you make abortions legal and available upon request to the woman, you're ensuring her safety. And that's something that really, really needs to be driven home at one point, right? Abortions lead to better women's health overall, across the board. Because getting rid of something, and this is the whole prohibition argument that we've made on several occasions is if you make something illegal, you're not removing the demand for it, right?
That's right. Well, you're also not.
You're making it more dangerous too.
Yeah, but you're also not serving maybe a moral position you have on it. And that's the danger of conflating legality with morality.
Yeah. Morality does not dictate
You're often
legislation.
shooting yourself in the foot when you start to play dictator of morals by way of law.
Yeah. We don't pass legislation based on what we consider moral. Like there are plenty of laws that some people might consider immoral and others that are the opposite of that, right?
Yeah.
Morality is not the determinant for legislation, nor should it be. Because then...
And legislation is no determinant for whether or not something is moral.
Right, exactly.
Just because something's illegal doesn't mean it's immoral.
There are two schools of thought when it comes to things like rights. And one of them is you start off with no rights and assign them arbitrarily, or but then that raises the question of, well, who gave you the right to assign rights? The other school of thought is grant all rights and remove them
According
with good reason.
to some reason.
Yeah, remove with good reason. Right? And when it comes to the issue of abortion, a woman's right to choose, the right to life, like I said in the original episode, ends where the right to bodily autonomy begins. That I really can't see how you can argue around that.
Yeah, it's a funny thing I felt after that episode that we did. It's something that to us just, in a sense, is intuitive. It's not as if we have to think, oh, I'm pro-choice. It's like as if we already are. There's this thought process going on unconsciously, and the exact logic of it we don't know until in a sense it's tested, but it's there. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure how we make these distinctions in life and how.
Well, I mean, it's like with the scientific method, right? The hypothesis precedes the proof of the hypothesis, right?
So it becomes the coding of variables like we were talking about before, and it's just a case of different variables and not taking other variables into consideration because of the weight of other variables. Yeah, I guess. The acorn's important.
The acorn's important? The acorn's not important.
No, the acorn tree thing.
Acorn tree thing.
Protect that acorn.
Yeah.
Kill people for it. Kill people for acorns.
All right. Closing thoughts.
Closing thoughts. Screw moral dictatorship, and err on the side of each individual being the moral determinant for their own selves. I guess that'll be my...
Yes, I wish everyone well and trying not to be a fascist out there in the world.
Yeah.
Moral fascism.
It takes a clear mind to avoid all the planting of seeds of thoughts that lead to fascism in a sense, right?
Yeah.
As for myself, I'm in complete agreement with both of you. Like, fuck moral dictatorship, moral fascism, as you would like to call it, probably.
Safe, legal abortions.
Well, I know I'm very extreme in the sense that I almost feel that speaking is a very dangerous. Even putting a thought out there is very, very dangerous.
No, you're right.
And
it is seeds of fascism that people throw around willy-nilly these days.
But another point that I think needs to be said as well is that advocating for safe, legal abortions and the right to a woman's right to body autonomy, that does not mean that you have to have you have to be fully happy and endorsing of abortions in all cases, or on a personal level that you have to choose abortion for yourself anytime.
Right. What you're saying
the
is we're
opportunity
not
comes up.
pro-abortion. We're pro-choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not as if we're going, hooray, sucking fetuses and throw them on the barbecue. Let's have a barbecue. Like, let's celebrate this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still, I don't know. It's a very emotional and very everything. But having an abortion, you know, it's got to be.
I mean, if a woman who doesn't choose to have an abortion, even though she might consider it or something like that, it's not like we're suggesting they have to feel guilty for not having chosen abortion because they're implying something for everybody else who has an abortion. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Just because you support a woman's right to choose doesn't mean you're insisting that she must choose abortion.
Yeah.
That's just it. To me, it comes down to the right to choose.
See what we're doing here? We're being very, very careful not to tell anyone what they have to think or do.
No, exactly. Yeah, like even if I accept secular morality as my foundation for determining right from wrong, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to force it on everyone else. You know, but I just happen to think it's a better system, and I wish more people would agree with that, but I'm not going to force them to. You know, just same with the abortion thing.
That's the ironic thing. We're not going to force them.
Yeah.
But that's the problem with the pro-life side, is that they want to force a moral outcome on some other person that has nothing to do with them.
Yes.
Yeah. Something else that was
just because it's a deeply held value or whatever, it bulldozes any deeply held value that might be held by the actual relevant moral agents in a moral situation.
Well, and what's unfortunate is that you can make these claims and be pro-life and make all these claims, but never actually witness any of the world that brings about. You know what I mean? Like, you can be completely removed from it all, you know, and just make these declarations and move along and, you know, impose these laws and just mosey on around.
Yeah. Well, something that was brought up post-show last time was, I think Matt asked me if I would still support a woman's right to choose an abortion if she, if she found out she was having a black baby and wanted to abort it for that sole reason. I'm like, yeah, I would still support her right to choose. I might find that action morally reprehensible.
Yeah,
well, yeah, it's terrible.
But I'm not going to deny her right to choose that option.
Yeah.
This has been Critical Junction, episode 45, part 2. I'm Mark.
I'm still Luke.
I'm Joe.
As always, thanks for listening, and until next time, keep thinking critically.